don't you just get a craving in the middle of the summer for an ear of corn on the cob? It's the most all-American of all-American dishes. And when I say all-American, I mean like as in pan-American, because right here in Mexico is where corn first began. It was started off as just this little wild grass called teosinte. And over many thousands of years, it was domesticated. And in that whole process of domestication, of genetic selection, it was domesticated in a way that created the kernels in their own little sheath. You can see that all of the kernels of corn are completely covered by that husk. So it's dependent on humankind for its propagation. Now, it's a very interesting plant. It comes out in two different ways here. This is the tassel, or the male blossom there. And then the female part of it comes out first as these beautiful little silks, and each silk is about that long. And each silk is tied to what will become a kernel on the cob. And as the pollen comes down from the male tassel, it has to pollinate each one of those little silks so that the whole cob will fill with those beautiful little kernels. Those delicious little kernels, those nutritious little kernels. Now, but here in Mexico, they choose a type of corn that's called a flint corn. It's a very hard starch because they're going to use it to grind up and make corn tortillas with. The whole process from corn to tortilla is also a process that's really been touched by human intervention. You see, in ancient times here, the indigenous population, they learned that if they would boil that dried flint corn with mineral lime, what we would sometimes call mason's lime or pickling lime, that it would change the corn. It would dissolve off that outer hull, making it more nutritious and changing its texture so that when they ground it up, they could make this wonderful dough out of it, almost an elastic-like dough. The process of cooking the corn like that is called Nixtamalization. And the dough, they call it masa here. I came across this place that is pretty impressive just for its scale. Now, you may be thinking a huge factory or something, but it's actually a ton of machinery that's just packed into this one small room. But I wanted to show you what that whole process is like, because well, think about wheat in our culture. There's a place that would mill wheat into flour and then distribute it to bakeries. Well, this place here well, it's the place where they take the corn and they grind it into masa and distribute it to little taquerias and to, little restaurants around here that would need to have masa. This is where all of the corn is kept, the dried kernels of corn. Con permiso. There's an Archimedean screw in the middle of this that takes the corn from this hopper and deposits it right up into this up here, where it's mixed with water and that calcium hydroxide that takes away, that dissolves away that hull on the outside. So it's mixed up there and then dumped into these great big vats and allowed to sort of steep for a little while. Now that's all done with very, very hot water. So the steeping is almost like a sort of partial cooking. So after a few hours of steeping there, goes right down into these bins and it's washed. You can see that hull has come off of it. And this is the stage at which it's called nixtamal. There's a little bit of water that gets mixed with that damp corn to grind it into the masa. And this is the millstone that's used. It's made out of basalt or lava rock, been used for thousands of years. But of course, this is an electric machine. Look in there, that's the millstone grinding that corn into this dough. See how hot it is when it comes out of that process? Now right next door, there's a little tortilleria where they turn this masa in a commercial way into tortillas. Let's go check that out. The masa gets kneaded with some water to give it the appropriate texture for making the tortillas. It comes out here and then is hoisted from here on top of this machine. Those are rollers, and there's a die cutter underneath. Come back here and I'll show you how this works. See the masa on the top, And then the dies are on the inside. So it's rolling out a thin sheet of the masa, cutting it, and then it goes onto these very hot conveyors. The conveyors continue several times, flipping the tortillas, and then they're deposited when they're fully cooked in the front. You see how puffy they are there? Puffy always means tender when it comes to tortillas. They make them in several different sizes, little tiny ones for little bitty tacos, and then big ones to accompany your meal. I need some immediate gratification, all those great toasty smells of the tortillas coming out of that machine. I'm not the only one, obviously, because this guy set up this fabulous little taco stand, and it's got a whole array, almost like a buffet here, of all the toppings that you can put on them. And then he's got a little grill and a griddle over here. Oh, voy a querer un taco de carne enchilada, por favor. So he's got this stew of thin sliced pork. Look at, he's heating it up there. It's thin sliced pork that's in a red chili sauce. He'll get it sizzling hot and then make little soft tacos using those just made corn tortillas from the other side. Gracias. Boy, this looks good. This is a Tamaleria. That may surprise you. There is really a place that specializes in selling nothing but tamales, but this is Flor de Lis in Mexico City. There's 20 of these places in town. And in fact, they've been around for 80 years building up this amazing business to where they make 6,000 to 10,000 tamales to sell in this town every single day. Now just take a look at this tamal here. Beautiful, isn't it? Now it's made in a, factory, I guess you would call it, not very far from here. And the first thing that they do is to make this masa harina. They actually make it into nixtamal, into that corn dough, and then dry it and then grind it into a powder, mix it up. All the rest of the ingredients, the liquid and the fat. I think they use a vegetable shortening for some and lard for others. And then they beat it really well so it gets super airy. Then they put it into this amazing contraption that lifts it up and dumps it into this hopper. And then there's an automated machine that portions it out into a corn husk. There's somebody that puts the corn husk right in there, and then it portions out a portion of masa, tops it with a little bit of this green salsa, in this particular tamal. Little piece of chicken goes on there, and then by hand they're all folded up, laid into these beautiful trays, and then put into steamers to steam for about an hour and 15 minutes or so. Now there's some other tamales that I want to show you here, because these are, they may surprise you. This is a classic sweet tamal made with pineapple, one of my very favorite things, great for breakfast or a mid-morning snack. But here's the ringer now. Okay, this is a chocolate tamal. I don't know whether they invented it here. It's certainly not a very common thing to find, but man, do I love its flavor. It's got that Mexican chocolate flavor with the cinnamon and all that sort of stuff. A lot of times people will drink atole de chocolate, this warm masa thickened chocolate beverage with their tamales, and there you've got everything all in one package. I just couldn't wait to get home and work out a recipe for those tamales, and they're Mexican chocolate tamales. So of course the first thing that we had to do was find the right chocolate. Of course, Ibarra is one that you can find readily in most of the grocery stores, but then found this new one in our local Mexican markets. It's actually made in Guatemala, but it's a great tasting Mexican style chocolate. See how it looks a little powdery on the top? Expect that when you open up any of these, because these are chocolates that are used for making hot chocolate, not for melting and making confections out of. Grind it up. I've got some butter. I'm going to turn the mixer back on. I've already beaten this butter until it's pretty soft. Now out of the food processor, going to come about a cup and a half of ground Mexican chocolate. Oh, it's already smelling really good here. A third of a cup of sugar, a generous half teaspoon of salt, and about a teaspoon and a half of baking powder. And I'm going to beat that mixture until it's light and fluffy. That'll take about 3 minutes. Now the masa goes in. Oh, well, in Mexico, it's pretty common to use fresh masa to make tamales, but it's easier for most of us to buy a package of this instant masa. And if you can find one that's for tamales, it means it's more coarsely ground and it'll give a better texture to the tamales. If you only find the one for tortillas, that's okay too. Turn the mixer on low speed, and I'm putting in about 3.5 cups of the dehydrated masa or masa harina. Now the liquid for this recipe, I found, was best with milk. It gives it a little bit of a cakier consistency. Now, I've got a couple of tips for you when you're making these chocolate tamales. The first is to refrigerate this batter for about an hour after you've done that final beating to allow all of that dry masa mix to absorb the liquid. Bring it back out, beat it again, maybe add a little bit of milk to it to give it that lovely, fluffy cake batter kind of consistency. The second tip is persuade somebody to help you. You know, you've got a lot of little handwork to do, and it's fun to share it with somebody else. Now come over here and I'll show you how you do this forming of the tamales. We scoop out a big spoon of the masa, the chocolate masa, put it down into the corn husks. Now these corn husks have been soaked for a couple of hours, the kind you can find at any of the grocery stores or Mexican groceries. I'm going to put some filling in here. I like to put raisins, but Lainey chose this fabulous chocolate made by one of our premier local producers here in Chicago. It's spicy, got the cinnamon that we always associate with Mexican chocolate, and it'll melt right in the middle of that, creating that wonderful gooiness. Now, the sides of the masa come up around, enclosing the raisin filling there. Roll it around like that, twist it under like that, and then I've torn some of these ties from the corn husks. Give it a couple of very simple knots, and then they're ready to go into the steamer. Now the steamer is set up lined with some of those soaked corn husks. Lay them down on the bottom, and then stand your tamales up like that. Cover it with some more soaked husks on the top, put the top on it, and let them steam for at least an hour until the tamal comes free from that corn husk. These tamales turned out so incredibly good that I could just see them as a special dessert for an elegant dinner party. So we unmolded a couple of them on a corn husk, still steaming hot. I'm going to drizzle on this luscious custard sauce.
I'm going to put some of that Mexican chocolate that we put inside. I think that'll be really good.
Doesn't that look good? How about a big spoonful of berries?
And a sprig of mint to finish it all off. Go.
Okay, now we did the tortillas, then I took you here and showed you a world of tamales. But there's still more corn to come. Gracias. You know, creamy corn soup, or what they call here crema de elote, is as common as, well, chicken noodle soup would be for us. I mean, just take a look at this. Campbell's even makes a crema de elote in a can. Ahora con más elotes, now with more corn in it. But this is not like our corn chowder because it's not made from sweet corn. It's made from this fresh field corn. Now the cob looks more or less the same as what we would expect here, but if you open it up like that, you'll notice that the kernels are a little bit bigger, and if you take a nail right into one, well, it won't be quite as juicy as ours. It's certainly not as sweet in flavor. It's a lot starchier, so it just means that this corn soup will thicken up by itself. You don't have to add any other kinds of starches to it. So what do we do if we want to make a Mexican-style corn chowder in the United States? Well, a few years ago, I figured out if you take that masa and mix it together with our sweet corn, well, you come out with something that's not too different in flavor and texture to this. I thought it was kind of mean for me just to tell you how to make that fresh corn soup. Thought I'd show you because it's so delicious. It's not a hard recipe to make at all. I'm cutting kernels off of 3 cobs of corn. I've used the kind of 2-bowl system, a small bowl turned upside down in the middle. That gives me a steady place, and then the kernels can just fall all to the side there. Pick up that. I'm going to put the kernels now into blender jar. Scrape them all down in there. Now I've already cooked some onions and garlic till they're lightly browned. That'll be sweet and add a nice dimension to our soup. Now we're going to add the masa. Remember I was talking about the difference between sweet corn and field corn. This is going to add that little bit of field corn-like flavor. Put the masa harina, this is the instant masa mix, about 3 tablespoons of it in there. A little bit of water to facilitate the blending, and then blend it to a smooth puree. Melt a couple of tablespoons of butter in the saucepan, then pour in the corn puree and stir it for several minutes until it's really quite thick. Add a couple of cups of milk. Stir that until it's really well combined. Then I'm going to cover it partially and let it simmer for about 20 minutes or so, just for all of those flavors to come together to get that wonderful texture out of the soup that we're looking for. In the meantime, I'm going to roast some peppers here. Grab a poblano pepper and also a great big red pepper. Now those, I'll turn over this high open flame until they're completely blackened on the outside. Let them sit for a few minutes with a towel over the top of them, then peel off all of that charred skin. Tear out the seed pod from the center, and of course the stem will come with it. Then rinse them briefly under water to get rid of any stray bits of skin or some seeds. Chop it up. Now after the soup is simmered for a little while, I like to strain it. I guess you wouldn't have to do this if you didn't want to. But for me, those little bits of corn kernel skin make the soup, well, more rustic, and I'm looking for something that's a little bit more refined. So once this goes through the strainer, put it back in the pot, add the roasted peppers to it. And the final addition for this luxurious fresh corn soup is about a cupful of heavy cream. Now we're going to let this simmer medium-low heat for about 10 more minutes. Add a good dash of salt. We can check the seasonings right before we serve it. Let's thin this out just a tiny bit with some milk. It's a little thicker than what I wanted it to be at the very end. Ladle it into some bowls. Sprinkle some queso fresco all around there. Nice dollop of that fresh crab meat right in the middle of it. Few leaves of cilantro. Now what we've seen so far is tortillas and then tamales. Now a fresh corn crema de elote soup. But are we missing something? I mean, aren't we missing the thing that most of us in the United States think about when we say corn? When we say summer corn, corn on the cob? Elote is what you call corn on the cob in Mexico. And it's like one of the most favorite of all the street snacks that you'll find. You can find it from one end of the country to the other. Find it boiled, just like that on the cob, or you can buy it off the cob, cut off the cob. They'll oftentimes call that esquites. One of my favorites down here. That's the boiled corn that's been grilled to a nice rustic chewiness. Si voy a querer uno de estos, por favor. Here goes the mayonnaise spread all over it. That gives it a really tangy creaminess. A nutty queso añejo, That's a really spicy chile de árbol. Now that stuff is rustic. It's chewy. It's great street food. Definitely chewier, not as sweet as what you'd make if you did the same thing with sweet corn. Of course, I don't have field corn to work with when I'm back in Chicago, so I've got to use sweet corn. So let me show you how I make elote asado estilo Chicago style grilled corn. I soak our sweet corn, still in its husk, in water for about 15 minutes or so, and then put it onto a grill that's heated to about medium. Then turn it every 5 minutes or so, and after about 15 minutes, it'll be cooked on the inside and sort of charred a little on the outside. Lainey, you ready for some grilled corn?
Yeah.
I put out there some of the Mexican crema, the really luxurious stuff. I put that out in place of the mayonnaise. That's the queso añejo. You know, sometimes when I don't have queso añejo, I'll use Romano or Parmesan, but there's also some limes there, and that's the shaker of hot chili over there. Now, after you grill the corn for its 15 minutes or so, then it's the easiest thing is just to peel back this and just leave the husks right on there like that. Then you can just lay it back on the grill. You want to make a little tie to go around the end of it there, you can do that. Looks kind of pretty there. Let them grill there for a few more minutes, 3 or 4 minutes, just to brown up nicely and get that little chewiness that I like in the Mexican field corn. You know, when you start peeling back the layers of Native American corn, it's just amazing stuff. I mean, it's a grain and a vegetable, it's a bread and a snack and a soup. But you know what? Don't overlook elote asado. Don't overlook grilled corn. You might find your favorite corns right in your own backyard. How's it coming?
Great.
You got a little bit of salt on there?
Yeah.
Is that what I saw? Okay. Now, can I have a little bit of that? Come on, more chili, more chili, more chili.
I'm working on it.
Okay, now that's good. I think
Okay.
that'll be good. Take a bite, and then I get the second bite.
Okay.
Ah.
God.
Okay, pass it over here. Okay. Okay.
Go.
Back to you. Good?